All right, my clock is saying it's 2 after the hour, so I want to officially welcome all of you and thank you for making the time to join us. It's the afternoon where I am in New York City, in Astoria, Queens, New York. I'm welcoming you all to this very, very timely and exciting webinar we have planned for you today. My name is Christine Deska. I am the president and co-founder of Nonprofit Sector Strategies and BellesBoard. But today, the hat that I am so privileged to wear is the president of the Nonprofit Resource Hub. And we are a trade association with almost 500 nonprofit members and many, many amazing associate members, two of whom are joining me today, and I'm very excited to introduce shortly. But for those of you who are from nonprofit organizations, regardless of your role, if you have not yet heard of the Nonprofit Resource Hub, oh, thank you. You can see the slide here. Perfect timing. My teammates. Allison LaFerlita is our executive director of the Nonprofit Resource Hub, and it is free to join the NRH as a nonprofit partner. It's an incredible community of supportive nonprofit partners, as well as folks in the business community who truly care about the nonprofit sector and making sure that you have as many resources available to you that are trusted, reliable, all the things. We need this more than ever. So that is my sincere plug to become part of the Nonprofit Resource Hub. And if you're part of the business community joining in a board member capacity, please do connect with us. We have a really active LinkedIn group as well. And the nonprofit link will be in the chat to join. As I said, it's free for nonprofits and we're up to almost 500 folks. So let's kick off this webinar today. This is a session that we've received a really, really great response for. And I'm so excited to bring two of our newest associate members to the table to share their expertise. So I am joined by Sophia Shaw and Adam Wolford, the co-founders of PlanPerfect. And this session is called From Overwhelmed to On Track. Really getting a handle on your strategic planning. And I know from my personal perspective, when I work on board development, I always say to nonprofits, look, I'm doing you a disservice if I don't first ask, what's going on with your strategic plan? How's it going? Is it active? And all of the things, all the challenges that nonprofit leaders often come to the surface as we start to engage in that way. So we are going to tackle this in 3 segments today. Just to give you a heads up, we're going to start with what is the challenge around traditional strategic planning? Why is this often a problem for organizations to stay on top of? Secondly, how are we planning in these uncertain times of today? This evolving time is even more challenging for nonprofits. And lastly, how can we leave you with ways to take immediate action for your organization, regardless of where you are in your planning process, regardless if it's on the shelf, which we'll dig right into, haven't started yet, or you think you have an active strategic plan. We know you'll come away with powerful takeaways. So before we dig in, as I mentioned, I'm joined by Sophia and Adam, some of our newest associate members, and I'd like to turn it over to Sophia from PlanPerfect to introduce herself first.
Thank you, Christine, and Allison also here, and everybody from Nonprofit Resource Hub. We've been honored to become associate members and really pleased to be part of such an important group doing important work at this time. My background has been in the nonprofit sector since I was young. My first internship was at a museum, and I worked all the way through volunteering and also ending up at the Field Museum as a vice president, the CEO of the Chicago Botanic Garden, and then also leading the nonprofit governance program at Kellogg, which is the business school for Northwestern University, and becoming then after a consultant in strategic planning and governance for nonprofits of all sizes and helping philanthropists give away money too. So I think that's an interesting thing to talk about later in the sector. And then as maybe a coda or just the next chapter, Adam and I started PlanPerfect, which is a software company helping small to mid-sized nonprofits making strategic plans.
Sophia is being incredibly modest. I just reviewed your LinkedIn profile, and there is so much there in your background, and thank you for summarizing that so nicely for us. How about you, Adam?
Yes. Hi, Christine. Thank you so much for having us. And I echo Sophia's sentiment about the Nonprofit Resource Hub. We're just really, really pleased to be here. My name is Adam Wolford, another co-founder of PlanPerfect. My background is mostly in building technology and management consulting, mostly in the for-profit sector. I actually met Sophia when I was a student at Kellogg when she was running the board governance program. I still sit on the board that I initially was on as an ex officio member during that time. After I left business school, I was working building a technology product actually for the nonprofit sector. And then I was consulting with Sophia on a client. So we were working with strategic planning as a service. And then we really asked ourselves with this next chapter of Plan Perfect, how do we take what we were doing as a service and turn it into a product to increase our impact for small to mid-sized nonprofits? So that's sort of our story.
Amazing. Thank you again. All right, well, let's jump right into this. And before I have a slew of questions for our experts today, but I also want to encourage those of you who are joining us to please put your burning questions into the Q&A. That makes it easiest for us to address. We do aim to finish our dialogue by 45 after the hour to really allow the time to answer some of your questions live here on the webinar. We will also track them following the webinar. So if we don't get to address them today, we will do our best to reach out to you and follow up. So firstly, Sophia, I just want to jump in. I mean, the elephant in the room here is really when we go around and we meet all of these fantastic nonprofit leaders and we hear, well, we have a strategic plan, but it's kind of, as the expression goes, sitting on the shelf. We did the proper planning process, but we're not really engaged with it. Can you speak to why that challenge exists for so many organizations, just to set the scene for all of us?
Absolutely. It simply put, most strategic plans are not built for action or implementation, and they're not adaptable. They're oftentimes also way too ambitious. So maybe it's like on January 1, you set this New Year's resolution exercise routine idea and you really put a lot of thought into it, but in actuality, it doesn't fit your lifestyle, your routine, maybe even your fitness skills or interests. And that feeling that you have created something that you can't implement or you don't know the next step on is overwhelming. It's unsustainable and it leads to a feeling of being stuck or frozen. And just like that exercise routine that we set up that we can't implement, we don't get anything done with it. And then we just keep putting it off. We say, oh, there are these so many things I have to do every day. I just have to keep volleying this ball back of my operating my organization. Strategy is this other thing that I just don't have time for right now.
So well said. It's that fine balance of visioning, which is important, but also creating something actionable and having everyone engaged with that, all of your stakeholders. Adam, in terms of some of what Sophia referenced, I think you probably encountered this sort of planning paralysis that Sophia kind of alluded to. Why do you think this continues to be a pattern for nonprofit organizations? What is it about the planning process that kind of leaves us in this position oftentimes?
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest issue, or what Sophia also alluded to, is that it's approached as this mega sort of moment in time, right? You're going through this long process to develop the plan, and everybody is really focused on getting to the plan, right? Like, okay, that's our destination. I think there's little thought in also thinking about, okay, now that you have the plan, what's it actually look like to implement it, right? And to create space, time within your organization to adjust it as things change. I mean, we're all well aware of the macro and micro environment that we're existing in today. Having that flexibility and the ability to revisit it, I think, is so important. And I think that's what really causes this fear in the approach to strategic planning, is that I need to get it right now. Versus treating it as more of a moment in time in the journey that will continue to develop. And I think that's what really causes this paralysis up front, and people kind of throwing their hands up and saying, I'm not going to do it at all because I just don't know even where to start.
So true. I mean, it's just there's a lot of pressure that's put on organizations during this process when they finally take it on, and we all need to. It's so important, and but I think to kind of frame out this first segment of our conversation, I mean, Sophia, when you see a strategic plan that's really active, up, working, what are the signs? What are the signs of team alignment, the signs of engagement, the signs of implementation and action? So that we can all sort of think in our heads, okay, this is where organization can be one day.
Right. The first point there is that everybody on the team, whether that's a board member or staff, the executive team, volunteers, has a fundamental idea of what the plan says. It doesn't need to be every detail. It needs to be, what is our mission and what is our greatest priority? And if everybody can say that, then life becomes much easier. Everybody knows when something happens that makes us have to reassess or make a decision in the course of the day. We know what the decision-making matrix is. Let me give an example of that. When I was the CEO of the Chicago Botanic Garden, we made a strategic plan, and the fundamental principle at the end of the day was that the customer was first in the center. So, and we use the word customer for a reason. We just wanted to change the thinking for a little bit. So that the people that we served were at the center of our focus of our strategic plan. Now, where that makes action easier is one day the electricity for the whole area went out. So about a 5-mile radius, electricity went out. So 5 o'clock in the morning, I get a call, electricity's out, we should close for the day. And I said, okay, hold on, let's 1 second. Let's take our strategic plan. Who is in the center of the plan? The customer. Now, there's a lot of senior centers, elementary schools, parents, et cetera. It was summer camp, et cetera. I said, no, let's keep it open as long as we are allowed to by the health officials if the bathrooms are working. And let's serve all these people. And we had 3,000 people come that day, all of whom we got letters saying, thank you so much. We had no place to go. We had no air conditioning in the senior center. So I think that's a good anecdote to see what it really looks like. Maybe going back to that exercise concept, when your exercise plan is working when you are actually doing it.
It sounds so simple, right? But how many of us have embarked on an exercise plan that just, February came around and we were no longer engaged with it.
Right. And maybe just stepping back 1 second, not to take up more than my allotted share of time here, but why is a plan important to begin with? A plan is important to build that internal functionality, but it's also important to have that external facing unity and consistency of message, and whether that is to the people you're serving every day, whether that's to your donors, to a bank, it's a business plan. We use strategic plan in the nonprofit sector because we somehow are afraid of the word business, but nonprofits are a business too. We have to make money in order to grow and thrive and fulfill our missions. So you wouldn't say invest in your neighborhood ice cream shop without a business plan. A nonprofit should have a strategic plan like anybody else.
Amen. Absolutely. I think you touched on a lot of really important components, and one of the big struggles that I often see in terms of interacting with a lot of different nonprofit leaders is that overall buy-in. You mentioned, what is the fundamental idea and greatest priority? I remember when I worked at AARP, that giant organization did a great job of giving each of us a one-pager that we had at our desk that had our 3 pillars, and we all felt pulled in that same direction. And I did not realize at the time that that is something that takes a tremendous amount of work to do, whether it is a large organization or even a smaller organization. Buy-in and alignment is challenging. So for those of you who may have missed the first couple minutes, we are segmenting this discussion into 3 pieces. We're first tackling the problem with with traditional strategic planning and why strategic planning is important, followed by planning in uncertain terms, and then lastly, how can we kind of leave you with some ways to take immediate action regardless of where you are in your planning process. So we have set the stage, I think, very well, thanks to Adam and Sophia's expertise. So now let's really dig in, because we are in extremely uncertain times right now. I mean, every nonprofit leader I've almost ever interacted with, if the word overwhelmed didn't come up for an executive director of a small and mid-sized organization, I was shocked. I mean, you're all wearing so many hats, you're taking on so much. So we really wanted to give you some guidance on the uncertain times we're in now and how you can think of your strategic planning process a little bit differently. So Adam, what do you say when a nonprofit is struggling with trying to be proactive and strategic, but not getting bogged down with the analysis by paralysis, or however you want to describe it, because we know resources and capacity are always playing a role at the same time.
Yeah, I think your point is very well received, Christine. I mean, resources and time are even more limited today than they previously have been, and we definitely recognize that, you know, in our company and with the clients and customers that we serve. I think one thing you just mentioned, which AARP did, which sounds like just gave you sort of that one overarching priority for the organization, is even a step in the right direction. I think, you know, if you don't have a strategic plan and you went to 5 people in your organization and said, what do you think is most important to us right now? You would likely get 5 different answers. I think the strategic plan, you know, being strategic in general can start with one simple thing. It might be just defining the one sort of priority for your organization at this time, especially given everything changing in the world around us. So I think, you know, treating it as more of an iterative process versus, again, this large, overarching, long journey to get there will allow you, like, clients and nonprofits to be sort of proactive and strategic without being stuck, you know, in that, oh goodness, is this the right place to start? Is it not? Did I interview all the right people? Did I not? I think really thinking about it more in that iterative way will help.
That's great, Adam. I know it's so easy to get to that place of overwhelm. That's why I'm glad we're tackling this conversation, because oftentimes nonprofits have many different stakeholders to answer to serve. And just listing those out during a planning process can kind of get to that point of what do we do first. So, you know, Sophia, we've all somehow made it through the pandemic together. And now we're in a different form of economic uncertainty and other, especially when it relates to federal funding streams, a lot of ways those are being affected for different organizations. So when you think of advising organizations on how to really adapt during this time, what can you share that you think would be helpful for the folks joining?
Think, first of all, doing what you just said is acknowledging that it's scary. And that, I mean, I just remember, and I'm sure everybody on this call does too, the moment when we were sitting at home realizing that we weren't going to be able to go outside and see people and not serve the people we could in it was 5 years ago. And although we can certainly go outside right now, there's a definite fear of what's going to happen next. How are we going to have enough money to serve the people that we've been devoting ourselves to? How many more people are going to need our services that we can't serve if they're not getting support from our federal government, which has been a funding stream which we've been able to count on for a long time. I would say two things here, and what we should be doing now is, one is really caring for each other and listening to each other, which is one of the reasons maybe so many people came on today, is that we do need places where we can come together and know that somebody else has our back. The second thing is, each person who's leading their organization does know what they want to achieve. And one of the things that Adam and I keep talking about in the work we're doing is that being a bit disruptive in the nonprofit sector, you know why you're there. Let's write it down and let's make a plan on it. Just like, you know, when you leave your house, where you want to go. You may not know exactly how to get there, but you know where to go. Take the bold action as the executive director or the board chair or whomever. Write it down and see how you can get there. I think the nonprofit sector is full of so many super nice people that we're always asking everybody for their opinion. Is it okay if I turn right here or turn left here? Is it okay if I do this? Let's ask everybody if we should turn right or left, or if this is the exact right word of our plan. And to leave this part of my response to the section is, like, we just have to go for it. And part of going for it may be some mergers right now, some more comprehensive partnerships, some little more selflessness in terms of saying maybe my job and your job should be combined and we should make one organization rather than two. But basically knowing you can do it, we can do this.
Yeah, and just to pile on top of what Sophia said, we have one of our clients, which is a beautiful story. It's a Native American village in Alaska, and they are in the middle of dealing with a crisis in their federal funding. What I found so beautiful during our initial demo with them, which lasted twice as long just because we got deep into their history and their story, is that they actually are turning towards planning or focusing on strategy as a way of combating some of these things. I think a lot of people see it as, oh, we'll do strategy once we're stable and we're good to go, right? This is an add-on on top. They've totally flipped it on its head and they said, now that our resources are down or we're trying to figure out our next steps, let's turn towards this vision, our mission, figure out what is really critical. And to Sophia's point, making some of the tough decisions about what maybe is not, right? I think a lot of programming exists, and I think folks are sometimes nervous or scared to let certain things go that maybe aren't serving the mission and the vision in the way that it could. And I think the strategy is a perfect place to do that. It's figuring out, yes, what you want to absorb and say yes to and dream towards, but I think it's also realizing that you can say no or stop to certain other things that are within your organization.
We did
Yeah,
a
that
heat
is.
map. Yeah, I heard one. Sorry to get your. Sorry to interrupt. To add to your point, we were talking to a prospective donor and I mean a prospective client, and they said that their organization had done a heat map of everything that they were doing and its impact. And actually, all the things that the board wanted to do were the things that actually had the least impact on the people that they were serving, and the things that the staff wanted to do that had the most impact were the ones that the board didn't want to. So like, let's actually take the heat map. What are the things we're doing that has the most impact? Really lean in there and maybe get rid of some of the other things.
It's so important, when you think of businesses, they look at a bottom line, and if the profitability isn't there, things are chopped. And nonprofits should certainly not go in that direction. However, to your point about evaluating impact, there is a way to look at metrics and as that part of a planning process and really take a good hard look at, did we go a little bit off track in terms of our overall priorities because there was a funding opportunity, but now that we have to be more strategic going forward, how are we making hard decisions as a team based on our mission, based on where we want to be as an organization? And so I think, to kind of round out this second part of our conversation about, the uncertainty that we're all dealing with, I know many folks listening are just thinking, we would really love to plan, but we don't have that luxury. We would love to plan, but we're surviving. We would love to plan, but it's day to day. How do you reconcile that? How can we kind of help provide some guidance? Because like you were alluding to earlier, Adam, the planning is also a form of team building and support. It's a form of getting you through together. So how would you advise organizations who feel that pressure of where can we find this time? How do we make this time to plan?
Yeah, I think it goes back to a point that we've been underlining, which is it does not need to be this massive time-intensive process to get the planning started. I mean, even the exercise Sophia just described, which is on a 2x2 impact versus cost, like that is strategy, right? You're taking a look at your overall organization, understanding maybe where you have gaps on that 2x2, or maybe where some things are not serving your organization, making decisions there. From my perspective, the planning is how you survive, right? I think, if you left your house and to Sophia's point, didn't know where you were going and you were just worried about your next step, then you would really get lost, right? And you would have no sort of direction on where you're headed. So from our perspective, I think, having this strategic plan and being agile towards it is a means of survival. And not only that, but really shifting that mindset away from, hey, we're just trying to survive to really, thriving even in these uncertain times.
Absolutely. Did you want to add anything, Sophia, before we keep on?
Keep going.
Keep on. Yeah, I mean, just to underline and echo what Adam just referenced, I know for me, when I've been able to work with strategic planning committees over time, there's a comfort in being able to go back to the goals that we set and just all be on the same page with our direction. There's so much comfort in that. And if that's been lacking with your organization, know that being proactive, while it may be you may feel the strain in making the time. Think about what Adam just said. It's not, doesn't have to be this giant undertaking all at once. You start small and build. So let's segue now into the third piece of our topic today, and that is really thinking about how to take immediate action. So Adam, I've got a question for you. This is a tough one. Can you share a mindset shift that nonprofit leaders need to make if they want their plans to drive actual results rather than this checkbox? Because we know it's a best practice to have a strategic plan, but what about that mindset set shift piece, which is kind of like tackling a culture shift sometimes? I mean, these are really, really tough things to take on, but they can be done, right? When you chip away at it over time and make it a priority.
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest shift is shifting away from strategic planning or a strategic plan as a destination and really thinking about the process, both the planning and the execution as an overall journey. Sophia and I at PlanPerfect, we use our tool to actually drive our strategy as well. So we know firsthand how it can help. Especially when you're thinking about, I think a lot of folks now, they get a strategic plan. It's a long journey. They kind of get there, they celebrate. And then to the first point you made, it sits on a shelf, right? They don't revisit it. There's no structure of how to track against it. So I think thinking about this, in committing to strategic planning, as a cultural shift to what you said, Christine, and really a longer journey is probably the largest mindset shift that we've actually seen in our clients and customers, and that we encourage others to absorb no matter how they're doing their strategic planning process and implementing it.
So well said. And I guess, Sophia, for the folks listening who kind of feel like they have a plan in place, but it's just not what it needs to be right now, or the organization and the stakeholders who need to be engaged aren't quite there with that planning process or the plan, how would you guide leaders to breathe new life into a plan that's sort of been done, but may not be as active as it needs to be?
My advice there would be to lead bravely and to maybe print it out or whatever the tool is best for you. Turn off your phone, put it away, maybe put your computer on do not disturb. Find a quiet place and really lean into what the key points are for now. What do we need to do now? Maybe not where we're going to end up in 5 years, but what do we need to do between now and choose a date? What are the key words that are in this plan that are inspiring? What are the key words that you can even remember? I mean, I went with the first draft of our strategic plan that Adam and I made a year ago. We were on a podcast the other day, and I said, I would, die in the hill if everyone could just remember their mission statements or their strategic plans. And then I got off the call and I thought, oh no, I maybe.
Like,
So, maybe just go through and really do two things. Take a quiet moment, really figure out what it is about that plan that is resonating. And a good leader knows that. A good leader knows what is making a difference, what's moving the needle, and what's the fluff or the stuff that ChatGPT made or whatever. And then lead bravely through it. People need leaders right now. I remember when I was a CEO, I was a fairly young CEO, and I kept asking my board, what do I do now? What do I do now? It's like, because they were older, they were my boss. I said, and then I realized, they're not my parents. I'm a grown up. I was hired into this job because I was trusted as the leader. So even if it gets scary, let's have our leaders lead bravely and try to help through these times. Because if we as leaders start to become frozen, how can we expect anybody else to follow us?
Yeah.
more easier said than done, but.
Yeah, and I think just to add on, and something Sophia just so beautifully did even about our own organization, is I think as part of that bravery, it's realizing that maybe you allowed the plan to sit on the shelf and it needs to be revisited, right? I think even finding the courage in the space to say, I know we went through this process, it's not living right now and we need to breathe life into it, and here's how we're going to do it, I think is the sort of the immediate next step, which is maybe just, I don't want to say admitting wrongdoing because that's not what it is, but really just acknowledging where the plan is today. And that can align your internal team towards, an updated mission, which Sophia and I did immediately after that conversation. Your board members towards, this new mission and vision and energy that you're bringing. And I think that's really the most important part of that process.
Yeah, you both touched on so much. Our brains can only take in so much as well. Even as leaders trying to convey a strategic plan, where I've seen the most success is when it is boiled down into 3 to 5 pillars, often used with alliteration and really identifying those points of vision, those North Stars for your organization and everyone, just being able to kind of have that top of mind because we're also bombarded with information. So how can we take that breath and think of a more effective way to communicate, just baseline as human beings? And that kind of gets us to this next point around, or I guess question. We haven't really delved too much into the board engagement aspect of this. It can both be your organization's strongest asset. It can also be your organization's strongest pain point, depending on the composition of your board, but it certainly holds great opportunity for engagement. So Sophia, what would you say in terms of how can you foster ownership among the board and key leaders, and keep this momentum going over time, throughout your strategic planning process and beyond in monitoring it?
Yeah, and I'm not gonna lie, and I've been on a board, but having the board is oftentimes the most challenging part of running any organization, and also having a strategic plan. Um, and I say that with love. Because the board is oftentimes they're focused on other things in their lives, and the bottom line here is I'm going to go back to my point of the executive director leading with with leading bravely, is that sometimes the board really just wants you to tell them where you want to go, and they will follow, and sometimes the board really wants to go in a different direction, and you're really never going to solve some of their internal fighting or internal problems. But interviewing, maybe getting even a third party, or we have a tool in our software for this, but you asking maybe even a couple words, why are you here? What is this? What is it about our organization that you really love? Why do you give us money? Because people who give money to organizations are doing so because it makes them feel good. And so asking, when you give us money, when you show up for a board meeting, when you take time out of your life to be here, why? Can you try to whittle that down just into a few words? And then I think you might start to see alignment among the board members around something truly heartfelt and truly important, rather than engaging in what I often see boards doing in wordsmithing. I was once leading a strategic planning process for a big board, and we spent an hour debating whether the word execute should be in the strategic plan, like execute on a strategic plan. Some people were saying it's like execute, like, is that like murdering, or like, so that's how sometimes time is wasted, but trying to really whittle down why everybody is there, what can we do together, and implementing it can help.
Adam, did you have anything to add to that? Or we're just laughing at Sophia's good example.
I was laughing at the example. It was beautiful. I think the other thing, other than what Sophia said, which was so well said and beautifully sort of portrayed, I think also acknowledging and telling your board or your leadership team that you have a plan for reporting and tracking on it. I know I keep hitting on this point. It just feels so important to me. My background in strategy consulting, it's not atypical in the for-profit world. We drop a 200-page deck on their desks and walk away as well. So this piece of implementation and committing to it, and not only that, but committing to how you're going to report on it, is crucial in this journey. It's beautiful to have a wonderful, 10-page strategic plan that you can put on the website and looks beautiful. But at the end of the day, if you are not reporting on it or giving that upward and outward to your team, you lose the value very, very quickly. So for me, that's also super important to this process.
Yeah, I'm on some boards where we have the same report with no change every month. Like we keep saying, oh, we're going to do this, but there's no change. So to Adam said, putting it into some format where you can show how things are moving every month allows the board to have more confidence in its staff.
Totally.
Absolutely. I've certainly seen the most success where there's a carved out strategic planning committee of board members who sometimes self-select. That doesn't work for every organization because we know some people select themselves for things that they may not be self-aware enough to do so. But sometimes that works really well. But the engagement is key over time, and that mechanism for reporting. And so when you can use a platform like Sophia and Adam have created to help your organization do that in a very simplistic manner going forward, it can certainly energize all to see that movement over time. And Sophia, I wanted to reflect on what you mentioned also about, the why. One of my favorite exercises to do when facilitating board retreats is your why, then and now, because we know many nonprofits will have board members on for an extended period of time. And sometimes that does work. It's always just important to have a term defined. Doesn't need to necessarily be a limit. We could talk about that whole piece later, but your why then and now really tends to bring folks back to the engagement of the mission. And then that all ties to the vision of the strategic plan. So I really like that you mentioned that as a way to kind of re-engage if you do have something in place, but you don't feel like your members or your leadership is tied to that.
Right. And another point on there is to make sure that the board hears enough from the people that the organization is serving. So oftentimes our boards are so either physically separate or conceptually separated from the people we're serving, whether they're different demographics or whether they just don't see them because they're not nearby. But to really have the board hear from the people that the organization's mission is intended to, whose lives they're intended to improve, often helps because we all walk around the world with certain assumptions about what should happen. And then we say, oh, if only X would happen, then Y would be solved. And we maybe have those conversations with people at the supermarket or cocktail party or whatever. But if you actually talk to the people whose lives could be changed, how the X could be solved, they may say something very different. So making sure that the voices of the beneficiaries, the program participants, the members, et cetera, are included in this process not only helps the plan be realized, that customer in the center, but also help the board members become more aligned.
That is so important. I do often see that piece missed when we look at the overall stakeholders who've been part of a plan, part of a process. Wait a minute, what about this entire group of folks who were tasked with serving? How is their voice, really being accounted for? All right, well, we are at 40 after the hour, and we really did want to make sure we allow time for Q&A. I have one last question, and of course, some takeaways from our experts, but please, if you do have a burning question and you're listening, put it into the Q&A, or we can scan through the chat, but the Q&A makes it easier for us. And we'd love to answer your questions while we have you here. But before we do that, we're in this critical inflection point in time for nonprofit organizations right now. And so, Adam, when you think about how planning will really evolve over the next 5 or 10 years, even, what do you see happening throughout the nonprofit space that would be helpful for the leaders listening now to think of and know about for the future?
Definitely. I think from my perspective, where I'm hoping to see a shift, and this is one of the reasons we built PlanPerfect, was to help, lead this sort of shift in the space, is that we move away from, again, these like large overarching 5-year plans when we're not even sure what's going to happen next month. And move more towards being agile. I think the for-profit sector does this now, especially as they're trying to drive innovation. Small startups are able to quickly adapt to what they're seeing in their space. And I know nonprofits have a different call, but I think what we're hoping to see is that strategic planning, one, becomes way more approachable using technology, a mindset shift. There's a handful of ways to do it. And then I think most importantly, in that evolution, it also becomes more flexible. So as macro factors change, as things change within the organization around talent, funding, et cetera, you're able to continue to drive the ship as the captain and move it in a more easy way. So that's what I'm hoping to see as an output of our work on the whole.
That is really helpful because there was a time when every nonprofit, I think, thought they needed a 5-year plan. That might have been before our world started changing much more swiftly, and especially with AI sort of taking shape everywhere that can help us in so many ways, but could also intimidate smaller and medium-sized organizations who might not know where to start with that. So you've hit on a lot of, I think, helpful tidbits for folks to consider. Sophia, did you have anything to add before we go into Q&A?
Just to maybe also look at a strategic plan as being the way that we can prove our value to people who maybe wouldn't have ordinarily turned to supporting the nonprofit sector. That there are people who've been supporting through philanthropy and time for decades and decades. As part of what has made the beauty of America is this idea that we can become gathering places and support through our volunteerism and philanthropy. But there are a lot of people who've never actually become involved, and by having strategic plans, business plans that prove how valuable we are, and how we are going to have to take up some of the slack that is that will necessarily occur when people's safety nets are pulled out from underneath them. We can better prove why we're here, and we can then engage with more people and in partnership and then in health and prosperity, if you will.
Absolutely. Because of the uncertain time that we're in, one silver lining, if there was one, is that many people who weren't called to action previously are saying, what, now's the time I have to step up and do something. Here's a cause I've been passionate about for quite some time, and now I can jump in with my, extensive experience in consulting and give back to an organization in that way. So I always say to folks who've always had a hard time recruiting the right board members and staff leadership, you never know who will surface during a time when folks are kind of questioning and recommitting to their values. I've seen it. I've seen really amazing folks be unearthed and join leadership teams and boards because of this. All right, so let's take a few questions. I see a couple in the Q&A, and we've received a couple ahead of time. So I see Patricia, thank you for your question. Patricia says, what I am taking away is that a strategic plan has to be done with staff and board. So is it accurate to say that it is staff driven and board supported? Tough one, right?
That's a good one. That's a yes and.
I feel like every question I asked in business school, the answer was, it depends.
You're right. It depends. It depends.
So,
yeah. At the
yes,
end of the day, from a fiduciary standpoint, the board has to leads the strategic plan in terms of having to sign onto it, having to guide it, and as usually the largest donors to fulfilling that plan, they have to support it. Yes, clearly. But I also would agree with Patricia, is that in the majority of the nonprofits I've seen, the most successful strategic plans have been staff driven. And I'm going to go so far as to say as staff is the executive director or CEO. And I'll go back to the point I said earlier. As CEOs or executive directors, we are hired to lead. And sometimes we become shy about that because we want to make everybody happy. So I'd say it's executive director driven, given staff and board input, and then at the end of the day, the board needs to adopt it as their own.
Well said. Well said. Adam, did you want to add anything?
Sophia said it perfectly. I have nothing more to add there.
Yeah, I always think of the board as this helicopter coming in where needed for guidance and direction. And I think the way you just described it was perfect. All right, let's take Nora's question next. She says, thank you first. I'm glad you're on, Nora. Do you have any advice for a small team on how to employ collective decision-making in strategic planning? Great question.
Take a first stab at this. I think Sophia's previous point hits on it quite well, which maybe just contrarian thinking, like, do you really want to do collective decision making? I think that creates a lot of friction in the process itself. I'm not saying that the executive director goes off into a room, makes the plan, and then forces everybody along on it. I just think it's asking yourself where in the journey you bring certain members of your staff or board along. We're working with a client right now who faced just this. They were trying to create a strategic plan by committee. So they were having staff meetings where they were brainstorming and were putting Post-its on the wall and right. And it was good. However, each staff member has their own perspective of what's most important to them and the context of the organization. And it's really the executive director, CEO's job to contextualize that across the organization. So I think it's really being thoughtful about where you're inserting your staff in the process or your team in the process. And that's probably, like Sophia mentioned earlier with the board members, it's getting early on and understanding why they're working there, what's important to them, right? And starting to infuse that into the strategic plan versus trying to sit down and collectively develop it. I think is what my advice would be, and how we're seeing our clients kind of shifting their thinking with a lot of positive results. Sophia, I'm sure has.
I think in this case, one of my favorite parts of strategic planning are the value statements. So there's a bit of debate in the strategic planning consultant world. What is a value statement? Sometimes people think values are, let's say, community, integrity, et cetera. Those are definitely values. Those are more cultural values to the organization. What I'm talking about value statements is that everybody coming around and saying, what do we believe in? And let's take a sample nonprofit just made up. For example, one about bike safety. So one of the value statements I'd like to make for this mock organization about safety for cyclists would be, we believe that that helmets are helpful to saving cyclists' lives. Okay, can everybody around in this room in our organization get around that point? And if we have 50% of people who actually don't believe that helmets are important for bike safety, okay, well, we've got, let's work through that. But starting with the value statements can actually be really helpful, because then at least we're all on the same page. And then just in another direction altogether, going back to my topic and Adam's about leadership, is that one of the greatest moments of my life as a mother, when my kids were little, was when I stopped asking my 3 and 4-year-olds what they wanted for dinner. Now, do not quote me as saying that I think staff of nonprofits are 3 and 4-year-olds. But what I will say is, when I just decided I was going to make the pasta and the broccoli, everybody was happier, rather than always asking the questions.
I'm still working on that executive dinner making process in my household, but I do not ask them. Yeah, they get what they get.
Yeah, I mean,
No,
or asking a question, would you prefer to have pasta or chicken, but not saying pasta, chicken? Like, they're like, I got my own lives to worry about. Just make a decision.
there you go. Right. It's so ingrained and it's inherent in so many well-intentioned and super intelligent nonprofit leaders to be collaborative, but that ultimately could be at the detriment of getting a decision to fruition and being able to move forward in your process. So I think the way you frame that, Adam, about like, what is collective decision making for your team? What's the smart way to go about that, given all the dynamics of your organization? It's going to be different for everyone. All right, we have a couple other questions here. Robin, I'll try to answer yours properly. How do you take the long list of goals, strategies, and tactics that have people excited by it versus overwhelmed with how they will balance the new with their day jobs? So I guess how sort of some of what's taking shape in the plan might affect the day-to-day. Does that make sense for Adam or Sophia to address?
I can take it as
it's a tough
first
one.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Robin. So thank you for asking. I was just trying to process how to answer it. I think this question is kind of looking at again, the strategic planning living outside of the operations of the nonprofit, like it's something coming in over top. I think where we would rather see it as more of an integration. So I don't necessarily think the staff or anyone should ever be overwhelmed, but you would never want to say, here's an additional 50% of your work on top of what you're already doing with limited resources and time and energy. But a little bit more about how do you take what's being done again, look at it, of course, introduce new visionary ideas, but instead of thinking about it as, a day job with the strategy stuff on top, I see it a lot more as an integration, or where I see it as a successful implementation is when it really integrates.
That's really well said. It really is a part of the culture of understanding the importance of planning and how that relates to our role descriptions also. But Rachel or Robin, excuse me, we can follow up with you more offline on that because we'd like to know more context, I think, to help better answer. And then Rachel has a great question. A hard part of strategy and a small nonprofit or at a small nonprofit is the ability to measure the outcomes of the work we do with the limited systems we have and a small staff. How can you have an effective strategy where measuring strategic goals and outcomes when it's difficult? When you're a smaller team, how can you kind of pinpoint and figure out better, easier ways to measure your goals and outcomes?
Let's go back to the fictional bike helmet organization. And my answer would be to make the metrics as straightforward as possible for you. What can you measure? And let's say if it's the bike helmet, how many bike helmets do you think we can give out to people who don't have them this month? Let's say it's 30. So then that's something that's easy to measure. Have you given out 30 helmets? Have you not? More or less, et cetera. And if every month you are falling short, then you know that there's a fundamental problem with the business model. If every month you're exceeding that goal, then you know you're really onto something, that bike helmets really are the part of bike safety. Another thing that was revolutionary to me was doing it yes, no. Have we achieved this month? Have we gotten our newsletter out? Yes, no. Yes. I mean, find the moments for celebration and find easy ways to have the metrics that you can actually track and then report on them and then celebrate the small successes.
Yeah.
So important. Yeah. Go
I
ahead, Adam.
totally agree. And I think one thing that we see a lot of folks doing, which we encourage against, is sitting down and thinking, let me get all of the metrics that I want to measure, and then I'll build a plan. It's almost backwards, right? I come from an engineering background. You would never go into an experiment to measure a ton of stuff and then say, what did I learn here? You always go in kind of with a view or a hypothesis of what you're kind of looking for, right? And I think being able to really pull yourself towards building that plan and then figuring out which outcomes, to Sophia's point, one, are really critical, right? You don't need to measure every single little detail. In fact, that will cause paralysis in trying to just get the plan accomplished. I think it's finding those 3 to 5 things that you can really passionately see as sort of leading metrics of your organization, and just committing to those as a start. And I think that is where it's helpful. I feel like we see a lot of folks thinking they have to measure every single little tweak along the process. And we really discourage against that just because, it can cause a lot of bandwidth or scope creep on your already, constrained team.
Yeah, more of getting away from that paralysis by overanalyzing and just starting somewhere. You guys have given great examples.
Right.
Let me
One
try.
place, yeah. Go
Go
sorry.
ahead, yeah.
One of the places that Adam and I did this for our own companies, we're a startup, and we started a little bit over a year ago, and we were starting to be. There were moments when we were feeling paralysis as well. We're 2 people. We're starting a company. It's a software company, and when we figured out that our metric for the month of, I can't remember, November or something, was how many demos we had. Oh, it was such a breath of fresh air. So if we said our focus is how many demos we had, then everything we were doing was toward those. How do we get people? How do we talk to people? And then when we were actually talking to the people, we felt like we were being successful in achieving our plan, our goal. So find the things you can really, what are really going to drive the business, and when you're doing it, it feels really great.
I love that. Just one easy metric to look to
Fun.
for how are we doing? How are we doing and how are we conveying that? All right,
Right.
let's try to get to Paolo's question here and then we'll wrap up with some takeaways. I want to make sure to get you out on time. Paolo asks, Is it helpful to share and implement the strategic plan with your leadership circle, the people who support you financially, and invite them to offer their input? What would you say to that?
I'd say wholeheartedly yes. I think for multiple reasons. One is that you're going to get some really beautiful statements about and stories about why they're there with you. And that by sharing your plan, you're going to really hear what resonates. And then, of course, the ancillary positive potential effect is that they become bigger supporters or larger friends. So both the sort of purpose and the passion.
Agreed. When folks see impact and understand the impact that their dollars have, we know that they're likely to be more inspired to give.
And
Oh,
thank
that
them and thank them and thank them. How many
thank,
times
thank,
do we
right.
give money and we don't get thanked? Or how many times, you get a thank you note that has not even a real name and, name of signature on it. Thanking, stewarding, cultivating, asking.
Always. Yes. Thank you, Sophia. So let me ask you this as we wrap up in a few minutes. What's the one thing you hope folks who are on take away from this session? We really tried to cover a lot during this short hour. But what's one thing? I'll go to you first, Adam. What would you like folks to take away from the session? And I'll ask Sophia the same.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is definitely don't fear the process. I sense there's like such anxiety about even approaching strategic planning. I think just getting started on it and taking that first step will feel such a relief and feel so important. So I hope the one thing folks take away is that it does not need to be this massive thing. There's no such thing as perfection in this process. It's iterative, it's growth. It's really all about developing that view, that North Star for your organization, your board, your donors, your evangelists, whoever it is. And so I think that is really the goal here and what I hope people can walk away with.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, you can do it. That would be you can do it, and people not only can do it, but you need to do it. And that needing doesn't need to be like, oh, I need to do that. But when you do it, people are going to follow, and you're going to, let's all remember at the end of the day, at the end of the hour here, is we're doing this to have a positive impact on people, the health and well-being of our people and our planet. So this is not an academic exercise. This is how we deliver mission. This is how we do something when we wake up and we don't know what else to do. How do we make a difference? We make a plan. We help our teams realize that plan, and in short order, we could potentially help our communities and ourselves.
Absolutely. I love so much of this advice, and I love what you closed with. And we need to do this. There's got to be a place to start, take the fear out of it. I just want to give a huge thank you to Sophia Shaw and Adam Wolford, co-founders of PlanPerfect, for making the time to share this expertise. We are so glad that you were all with us today. We will be able to follow up with you individually. Barbara, I know we didn't get to your question, but we will follow up with you. And we'll share this information and more to come. Adam or Sophia, any final words before we wrap up today?
Thank you
I'll
for
just
having
thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having us, and huge shout out to Christine for guiding us through the discussion. Thank you so much.
Oh, sure. And on behalf of the Nonprofit Resource Hub, the organization sponsoring this, please join us for many more events in the future. We're providing expertise on various forms of fundraising all throughout May. We have a webinar like this each week of May, so please check that out. Thank you so much to everyone for joining. We know your time is limited, and we are so grateful that you joined us this
Thank you.
afternoon or morning or evening. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.